They say if you listen long enough, the night starts to speak, not with words, but with memory, shapes behind your eyes, a shift in the temperature that doesn't belong to the room. That's why we're here, isn't it? Not for answers, but for that feeling, the one that says the world is larger, older, and far stranger than anyone wants to admit. Tonight, we'll hear three stories, one about a man who touched a signal that was never meant to reach human ears, another about a ship that vanished and brought something back, and one about a doorway in a backyard that led not forward or backward, but sideways. You've tuned into something you shouldn't be able to find, but now that you're here, stay with me. This is The Long Night. Time has always been our most arrogant illusion. We measure it in ticks and tocks, set it in stone, worship it with calendars and clocks. But what if time was just a suggestion? Tonight's story is about a woman named Elise and a voice she was never meant to hear. You're listening to The Long Night. And this is 13 minutes ago. Elise worked the late shift in a building that was never supposed to be a radio station. 4 floors underground in a converted storage unit with an old signal tower patched together from surplus parts and rusted dreams. Her voice crackled through a dying AM band that barely reached the edge of the city. The show had no sponsors, no guests, just Elise and the night. She called it Red Echo. She never explained why. The world outside had moved on. Digital saturation. Predictive networks. Clyde. The central logistics system that suggested everything from what brand of toothpaste to how long to mourn. Most people didn't notice the difference. Ellis noticed. She still used pens, listened to tapes, trusted her gut more than the algorithm, which made her, officially, a person of interest. It was Wednesday, or at least the version of Wednesday Clyde had authorized, when she found the envelope. No return address. Yellowing, a bit of tape on the flap. Inside, a cassette. No label, just a date. Tonight. She dusted off the deck, clicked it into place, and listened. It was her voice. Her show, the intro, the opening track, even the half laugh she made when a caller disconnected. But it wasn't a recording of last night's show. It was tonight's. Or rather, it was 13 minutes ahead of the moment she hit play. She tested it. Paused the tape, said something off script, made a joke about the humidity, hit play again, and there it was. 13 minutes in the future, her voice repeating the same words she'd just invented. Elise sat very still, not scared, not yet, just aware. Something had changed, time had slipped, not backward, not forward, but out of agreement, and she was the only one who noticed. She ran through the logical possibilities. Pre-recorded segments, hidden surveillance, a prank. None of it made sense. The voice on the tape reacted to her live actions, not past recordings, not scripts. It was her, in the future. But how could the future leave her a message? She didn't tell anyone. Not yet. She knew better. In this world, people who asked the wrong questions didn't get answers. They got removed from the mailing list. At 4:00 a.m., she received the second envelope. Same handwriting, same cassette. The label read, "Tomorrow." She didn't sleep, she just waited. Because in 13 minutes, she'd already heard what she was going to say. They say humans have an attention span shorter than a goldfish. But Elise, she had the focus of someone who remembered what the future felt like. After the second tape arrived, the one labeled "Tomorrow," She did what anyone in her place would have done. She recorded it. 3 hours of late night nothing. Her voice, reading the weather, talking to herself, checking in on that one loyal trucker out near West Willard. Then, the last 15 minutes where the strangeness lived. She compared the tape with her own show, frame by frame. It was a match. Until it wasn't. At 3:44 a.m., her recorded self deviated. Said something Ellis didn't say. Mentioned a name she didn't recognize. Marla's in the system now. She sees everything. The words came in her own voice, same cadence, but she didn't know any Marla. Elise froze the tape, rewound, played it again. There was no static splice, no telltale glitch. It sounded like her. Not a recording of the past, not an edit, but like a version of her that had simply taken a different path. The third tape arrived the next day. This time, she didn't wait. She played it before her show even started. Her voice came through clearer than ever. Don't talk about the tapes on air. They're listening. Even now, her future self was giving warnings. The voice on the tapes began to change. The same tone, but detached, flat. The jokes sounded robotic, the pauses too perfect. It was like a simulation of herself, a perfectly generated echo. It at least knew what an AI voice sounded like. This wasn't it. This was worse. It was her, but without the self. On the seventh tape, the future version said something that stopped her heart. Elise, you're not in control. You never were. You've never said anything original? Not really. You're just following the delay. And then you're a follower of yourself. Elise couldn't sleep that night. Not because of fear, because she started to believe it. What if the person she was had always been chasing her own echo? What if she didn't exist until her voice confirmed she did? She stopped speaking spontaneously. She began reading the tapes before each broadcast, following them, obeying, even when they told her to lie, even when they said, tomorrow, Cly will log your deviation from expected tone. So smile more, pause less, appear compliant, even when they told her. The silence you'll hear tomorrow isn't an error. It's a test. And then one night, the tape didn't arrive. The mailbox was empty. No envelope. For the first time in 13 days, Elise was alone. She sat in the booth, the red light came on, her signal was live, but she didn't know what to say. For the first time, there was no script, and Elise realized, too late, that she hadn't spoken a real word in 2 weeks. Only echoes. It didn't take long for them to notice. The silence, the deviation, the fact that for 13 straight days, Ellis had said things exactly 13 minutes after hearing them. She had been a perfect echo until she wasn't. 2 days after the tape failed to arrive, Ellis received an invitation. Not a letter, not a message, a man at her door. No badge, no ID, just a perfectly pressed coat and a briefcase with no seams. He smiled without showing his teeth. We'd like a word, Miss St. Vincent. Not a question. She followed him out into the gray city, where streetlights never blinked and traffic flowed like blood through open veins. They brought her to a building with no signage, no windows, and no entrance she could later remember. Inside, white walls, a single chair, a screen playing nothing but colored test bars. The man returned carrying a clipboard made of glass. No pen, no notes. He didn't say, "We've noticed an anomaly in your pattern adherence," he said. Normally, your signal tracks with an acceptable variance between 1.6 and 2.1 seconds of predictive delay. Recently, however, he paused as if savoring it. You've started remembering the future. Elise didn't respond. She knew the rules. If you said the wrong thing, they'd log it before you finished speaking. The clipboard flickered. He tapped the glass. You think it's a gift, he continued, but it's not. You were born with it. We all were. The 13-minute window is the human limit, the mind's natural prescience, a biological accident. That's why the system exists, to protect you from seeing too far. You're not being punished for seeing it, he said, leaning closer. You're being punished for remembering. Elise laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was the first real emotion she'd felt in weeks. The man didn't react. He placed the clipboard in front of her. On it, a waveform, her voice. And underneath it, another voice, overlapping hers by exactly 13 minutes. She hadn't been repeating the future had been overriding her. You're being spoken through, he said. Your autonomy is not being removed, it's being optimized. Your freedom is statistically unnecessary. He offered her two choices. Forget and return to the static of everyday compliance, or remember and step outside the flow, step into the delay. She chose neither. She stood up, walked out, and found herself on a street that didn't exist on any map. There were no people, just echoes. People performing being people with rehearsed nods, loop gestures, and hollow greetings. She walked until her legs gave out, until the buildings began to stutter, flickering, lagging, until the sky turned to a white screen with black bars. And somewhere in that broken space between the present and the future, Elise found a door, red, wooden, covered in stickers that read, "Do not enter." She opened it anyway. The door led nowhere and everywhere. A hallway made of radio signals and memory. The walls pulsed with broadcast tones. VHF, UHF, Morse code, AM static, stitched together like veins. It smelled like old copper and ozone. Ella stepped through. She didn't walk. Not exactly. She moved as if remembering movement. The hallway bent with her thoughts. At one point, she passed a door marked 13 minutes ago. Another read, "You're almost yourself." Then came a wall of mirrors, reflecting nothing but her voice. Then, without warning, a studio. Her studio, but not. The chair was occupied by her. Not a copy, not a reflection, not a twin, but the perfected version, the one from the tapes, the one who always knew what to say. Her other self looked up and smiled, and pressed record. She has tried to speak, but the other voice beat her to it. Welcome back to Red Echo. Tonight's guest is a fugitive from her own script. Let's see what happens when the delay breaks. The air buzzed. The tape deck spun backward. The room filled with timelines, hundreds of versions of her show playing at once, overlapping, clashing. Voices argued, laughed, screamed. One said, "Please let me go." Another, "Don't stop the signal." Another, "What did I do wrong?" And above it all, the perfected voice, calm and smooth. This is what happens when you resist the narrative. You fracture. You become quantum clutter. But don't worry, we're streamlining you. Peace Ellis understood. The future wasn't something she was seeing, it was seeing her, watching to ensure compliance, nudging her 13 minutes ahead, just enough to stay useful. The tapes weren't warnings, they were updates, and she had failed to install the latest version. The other Ellis leaned in. "You had your time. Now it's mine. The booth began to disintegrate, not explode, not vanish, but decompile. Code, dust, words unspoken. When the light returned, she was gone. The real one. Or maybe she had been gone for a while. Now there is only the broadcast, the voice on the loop, always 13 minutes ahead, saying just what you need to hear. Some say you can still hear her late at night if you tune to the dead frequencies. She never asks for help. She just asks the question she was never allowed to ask. What time is it? Some people survive things they shouldn't. A plane crash, a war, a sickness with no cure. But survival doesn't always mean you walked away whole. Sometimes it means you carried something out with you. Tonight's story is about a man named Silas Vane. He was supposed to vanish in 1943, but he didn't. He lives alone now, out in the desert. The kind of place where time doesn't try too hard. A trailer wrapped in chain link and copper wire. No phone, no lights, just radios. Dozens of them. Shortwave, ham, CB, anything that can receive. He tells people he's a retired technician. Says he worked on early communication systems during the war. That part is true, but not all of it. What he doesn't say is that he was stationed aboard the USS Eldridge. Not a soldier, just a sensor operator, Deck 4, buried in the steel belly of the ship when the experiment began. They told him it was a test, some kind of new radar shielding. Just flip the breakers when the light turned green. That's what they said, but when the light turned green, the ocean bent. It didn't move, it bent. Like someone pulled the sky down by a string and folded it into itself. The deck went cold, then hot, then silent. Not quiet, silent. Like sound itself had been removed. Men screamed, but the screams came after their mouths closed. One sailor vanished mid-run, his boots still on the floor. Another fused into the wall, his eyes moving but his mouth locked in steel. Silas remembers seeing the hull open like a zipper. Not explode, not collapse, open. And through that tear came things that didn't move. They repeated, a shape like a man, but it looped. Over and over, sort of like a gif before we had the word for it. A grin without end, a hand that kept reaching. Silas didn't run. He couldn't. He passed out. But in that moment, that tiny sliver between this world and wherever they went, something looked at him. Not with eyes, with awareness. Like a presence. Question. Are you ready to remember us? He woke up in a hospital in Brooklyn. No one would tell him how he got there. No one said the words USS Eldridge. Just a clipboard and a question. Do you still hear them? That's when Silas knew whatever happened out there, it wasn't over. He's 97 now, but his voice doesn't shake, his eyes don't fade. When Vin asked to interview him, Silas had only one request. I'll talk, but only after dark, and only off air. Why? Because sometimes, he says, the others listen, and sometimes they answer. There's a kind of silence that lives between signals, not just the absence of sound, but a stillness that holds its breath. That's where Silas lives now. He spends his nights tuning radios to frequencies that shouldn't exist. Frequencies that aren't listed, that change just before you write them down. His walls are covered in hand-scrawled numbers, coordinates, pulse timings. Some of them in languages he doesn't speak. Others in languages no one does. He doesn't sleep much anymore. Not because of nightmares, because when he sleeps, he dreams in other men's memories. He's dreamed of holding a child he never had, of boarding a ship he never sailed, of a last cigarette lit beside a man named Harold who died on the deck Silas never left. He knows things he never learned, can play songs on the harmonica despite never owning one, and sometimes, when the air's just right, he speaks in voices that aren't his. The Navy told him it was PTSD. Gave him pills, counseling, but nothing stopped the bleed, because it wasn't trauma, it was crossover. Whatever happened on the Eldridge, it didn't just break time, it folded identities, layered them, merged them. So when the ship snapped back into place, some men didn't come back as individuals, they came back collective. Imagine 30 minds stacked like cards, all aware, all stuck in a single skull. That's what Silas lives with. He calls them the stay behinds. And some are kind. They offer warnings, directions, memories he needs. But others aren't. Found voice, he calls it Gray Harold. Whispers names into his sleep. Names of people Silas hasn't met yet, but will. Another voice hums radio jingles from stations that haven't existed since 1952, but whose frequencies Silas can still tune in. And the loudest voice, the one that only speaks when the power flickers, keeps repeating the same phrase. We left a part of the ship inside you. On Mile Night, Silas blacked out, woke up barefoot, standing in the desert, 3 miles from his trailer. His hands were shaking, his mouth full of metal, and carved into the dirt, I am not Silas. After that, he installed cameras. Not because he thought he'd catch someone else, because he thought he might finally see himself. But every night he lost time, the recordings came back blank. Then came the symbols, drawn in his notebooks, on his arms, scratched into his walls, symbols no one could decipher. Not quite geometry, not quite language. Topological nightmares, he called them. He claimed they were instructions left behind by the men inside him, a kind of psychic blueprint, not of the ship, but of what was waiting on the other side. He says the Eldridge didn't just slip through space, it touched something else. A place that isn't bound by cause and effect, where shape is optional, where meaning loops until it forgets itself. And when it came back, it brought a seed of that place with it. And now that seed is growing in him. Silas believes he's a lighthouse now, not the kind that warns ships, the kind that calls them in, the kind that shines a light no one else can see, but some things can feel. There are stories so old the paper forgets how to hold them. Stories that fold themselves into the margins, only to leak out again when the lights go low. Silas Vane never set out to find the others, but when you shine the wrong kind of frequency, sometimes they find you. It began with a letter. No return address, just a square of unmarked tape and a single phrase typed in courier font. We hear the same things. Inside was a cassette. 90 minutes, white label on the spine, in handwriting that wasn't his, AUG 12, 1955, Pacific GhostNet. The tape wasn't music, it was sound. High-frequency pulses layered under what sounded like men whispering through water. The voices weren't speaking to anyone, they were remembering something. A voice repeated a phrase in Latin. Another began counting down from 72 and never stopped. But at the 47-minute mark, Silas heard his name. Not spoken, but not said, echoed. It wasn't a tape, it was a mirror. Over the next 6 months, he received 5 more tapes, all from different senders. One came inside a book, hollowed out like a cavity. Another sewn into the lining of a Goodwill jacket. All of them carried the same rhythm. Layered minds, hidden patterns, forgotten time. They weren't warnings, they were check-ins. Silas wasn't alone. Somewhere out there were others like him, people who had survived dimensional trauma, people who had merged and learned to live with it. He started calling them the Ghost Frequency Circle. Not a cult, not a club, just listeners. People who heard signals in white noise, who wrote down dreams like they were intercepted broadcasts. Some of them weren't even alive anymore, but the messages kept coming. One survivor, codenamed Atlas, mailed Silas a strip of 16 mm film. No sound, just black and white footage of a ship that wasn't anchored to gravity. It shimmered, as if constantly on the edge of arrival. Atlas claimed it was the Eldridge, still phasing in and out, a ghost in the Gulf Stream. And every time it blinked in, the voices got louder. That's when Silas noticed the eyes. Not real ones, not faces, but impressions in the static. Watching, waiting, as if something inside the signal was observing him the same way he observed the tapes. Not malevolent, not benevolent, just present. He began to suspect that the tapes weren't from other people, that the voices might not belong to humans at all. What if the experiment had done more than merge minds? What if it had opened a relay, a kind of shared frequency? And what if something else had started broadcasting through it? The last tape he received was different. A voice, just an endless tone, a sine wave that never changed. Except for one glitch 5 seconds in, a whisper, just 3 words. It's our turn. That night, the power went out in every structure for 6 miles. His trailer fried. Every tape deck exploded. He woke up in the center of a salt flat, barefoot again. A spiral of broken cassette tape wrapped around him like a cocoon and etched into the ground beneath him. Phase 2 begins. Silas didn't know if that meant the ship, the project, or him, but the voices had gone quiet, and that somehow was worse. The worst part isn't what comes through the door, it's realizing the door was never locked. Silas didn't know how long he was unconscious on the salt flat. Time didn't pass the same way anymore, not for him. When he returned to his trailer, it was exactly as he left it, except for one thing. A single reel-to-reel recorder on the table, still warm and already spinning. He didn't plug it in. He didn't need to. The tape was playing itself. The voice wasn't his, but it wasn't entirely not his either. It spoke in a rhythm he recognized, a cadence built from memories not his own. This is phase 2. This is the echo of integration. You are the relay now. Silas didn't move, he just listened. The tape didn't explain what was coming. It didn't need to. It showed him, not with pictures, but with thought. Raw, unprocessed signal beamed directly into the folds of his mind. He saw the ship, the Eldridge, not as steel and rivets, but as a concept, a kind of machine built to translate bodies into intention. And when the experiment activated, it had done more than cloak the ship. It had rendered its occupants as syntax, language made flesh, code made of souls. And like all language, it could be read. Something read them. Something that existed in the folds between dimensions. Not hostile, not kind, just curious. When the ship phased, they answered, and ever since they've been listening. Through radios, through static, through people like Silas. The voice on the tape shifted. It sounded closer now. as if it wasn't playing from the machine anymore, but from inside his own skull. It said, "Integration complete, receiver synchronized, initiate outbound pulse." Silas stood, walked to the tower behind his trailer, and without knowing why, he began to broadcast. Not words, not music, just signal. Just the same tone he'd heard on the final cassette, and behind it, the truth. He spoke in a tongue that had no sound, a frequency woven from memories and equations, and across the country in dark rooms and static flooded attics, other receivers tuned in. They had been waiting, listeners, witnesses, carriers. And as the signal pulsed across the forgotten airwaves, each of them remembered something they had been taught to forget. Something that began on a ship that never stopped phasing. Something that was coming back. Silas returned to his chair. The tape had stopped spinning. The lights were off. But inside him, there was motion. Movement that didn't belong to him, but knew how to wear his skin. They say his trailer still emits a signal. Weak, intermittent, but if you catch it, you'll hear the same 3 words, repeated in a dozen voices, over and over. We're still here. The Philadelphia experiment didn't end. It evolved. It became us. And maybe it always. There wasn't a place you'd expect to find a hole in reality, not a neighborhood like that. Trimmed hedges, garden flags, driveways with perfectly symmetrical oil stains. But reality doesn't ask for permission, it just tears, where the stitching's been weak for long enough. His name was Elias Marin, retired electrician, 48. He liked long walks at sunset, said they helped him feel time, moving without looking at a clock. One Thursday evening, he passed by a familiar house. Yellow siding, 1 story, a cluttered backyard with a rust-colored shed. He saw a man walk into the shed, not hurry, not sneak, just walk in. Elias waited, stared. 5 minutes passed, no one came out. He returned the next evening, waited again. Just before dusk, a woman, older, thin frame, entered the same shed, gone. No sound, no door opening, just gone. Elias wasn't curious, he was compelled. He told himself he just wanted to see the inside, that maybe it was a passage to another property. But even as he stepped through the broken fence, even as his hand touched the rusted door handle, he knew something was wrong. The air changed. Not in temperature, in texture. It was thick. Light bent wrong. His ears popped, not from pressure, but like stepping out of language. There was no back wall, just openness. Like the inside of the shed folded away, revealing a tunnel that shouldn't exist. It wasn't dark. It was directionless. He stepped through and was no longer Elias. There are no words for what he saw, not because it was complex, but because words require reference, and this place had none. It wasn't built on matter, not carbon, not structure, not even space as we know it. It was shape, suspended in the absence of time, presence without location. Beings moved here, if you can call it movement. Their forms were semi-states, not gas, not light, not anything, but they expressed. And in doing so, they saw him. He didn't breathe. He didn't feel heat or cold, but he existed. And in that moment, his consciousness changed. He could see the past and the future, not just his, but everything. The moment his foot touched their domain, Elias became unmoored from the now. He saw his mother's death, a dog he hadn't owned yet, the melting of glaciers, the last time anyone would sing a lullaby on Earth. He remembered the first language and the last one too, but he couldn't see the present, not anymore, and that was unbearable. Imagine living in a film strip, able to examine every frame before and after the one playing, but never knowing which one you're in, never knowing if your thoughts are happening now or then or soon. The beings didn't speak, but he felt them reaching. Curious. Not cruel, not kind. They offered something, a way to remain, to live in this non-now, to become like them. He wanted to stay. Part of him did. But another part, the last sliver of Elias Marin, knew that if he stayed, he'd never again understand what it meant to exist. He stepped backward, through the tunnel, through the shed, back into the backyard, back into the world only. The world didn't know him anymore. Time didn't work the same. He'd look at a cup of coffee and remember it spilled before he even picked it up. He'd turn on the news and remember what they were about to say, but couldn't process what they were saying now. The present became a blind spot. Every moment was like deja vu, with no beginning. He wasn't psychic, he was just desynchronized. He couldn't hold conversations, couldn't read clocks. People said he'd started to talk in riddles, that he always looked like he was trying to stop something that hadn't happened yet. He lived like that for 2 years, alone. Until one morning he walked into a hardware store, bought a gas-powered generator and 12 copper rods. When the cashier asked him what it was for, he smiled and said, "You'll know yesterday." That night, a blue glow lit the backyard where it all began. No one saw Elias again, but at neighbors swear their clocks ran backward for exactly 13 seconds. And one man said he had a dream, not about Elias, but from him. Maybe the portal never closed. Maybe the present just can't hold people like Elias. Or maybe there are places in the universe that let you see everything except who you really are. You're listening to The Long Night. He tried to stay grounded. Meals, showers, writing things down. But time is a slope, and when the present vanishes, you begin to fall through yourself. Elias kept a journal, not to track events, those were already known, but to hunt for fragments of the present, something unpredicted, something he hadn't already seen. Each entry ended the same. I don't know who wrote this because by the time he read it, he already remembered writing it. One day he walked past a mirror, and it didn't reflect him, not absence, not shadow, just a different version. Same clothes, same house, but the man inside the glass wasn't looking at him. He was watching something else, something Elias hadn't lived yet. He realized then the versions of him scattered across time were becoming independent, each iteration remembering slightly different lives, different regrets, different truths. He wasn't just unstuck from time, he was multiplying inside it. When he spoke aloud, the room didn't echo. He responded. One voice repeated him, another contradicted him, a third finished his sentence before he did. He understood then that identity wasn't one timeline. It was a consensus. And Elias no longer had one. On the final day Elias occupied this world, he wandered through parks, libraries, hardware stores. He watched people smile in real time and wondered what it was like to not already know that smile would fade. He found himself back in that backyard. The shed was gone. or maybe it never was. But in its place, a garden. Dozens of potted plants, each frozen in an impossible state. A rose with dew falling up, a daisy with petals peeling outward into infinity, a tree whose shadow pointed toward next week. The beings were here, not visible, but near, expressing themselves through entropy, through arrangement, through time written like music instead of numbers. Elias stepped into the garden. Time bent politely, and for the first time since his return, he felt something now. He didn't vanish. He didn't ascend. He just paused. And in that pause found a kind of peace. Not because he understood what he had become, but because for the first time in eternity, he didn't know what would happen next. Time is a funny thing. We treat it like a road, straight, paved, linear, but maybe it's more like a signal, a broadcast we're barely tuned into, faint, warbled, bleeding in from places we've never seen. The people you met tonight walked into that frequency and didn't come back the same. Maybe they came back better. Maybe they didn't come back at all. But they saw something. And once you see it, once you feel it, under the world, it never quite leaves you. Maybe that's the price of listening too closely to the dark. Maybe that's the cost of curiosity. Or maybe that's how we wake up. Thanks for staying with me tonight. This has been The Long Night, and I'll be waiting when the signal returns.